It's pretty nice when things surprise you, especially going in and expecting a massive dumpster fire, only to find it's toasty warm inside that blazing inferno. Nothing like burning degeneracy to keep me comfy in the summer heat. My metaphor might be getting a bit mixed, but, now that summer 2020 is coming to a close, it's time to take a retrospective look back on what we got and decide just how I felt about it all. That means the good, the bad, and, of course, the ugly. And there were certainly a lot of those. So let's not waste any time and dive right into the glorious clusterfuck that was Corona-chan's leftovers. I mean, summer 2020 anime. Let's start off by looking at the better shows, which when I first started this season I was expecting there to be absolutely none of, given the shitty lineup of mostly borderline porn that's been worming its way onto television for the last few years. These are ones I would actively recommend people to check out, so they're carrying my seal of approval for one reason or another. I can't state enough how good Deca-Dence is. This show is so layered with thematic meaning. From the relationships games can build, the parasocial relationships with those we interact with vicariously through our media, the exploitation of the lower classes by the upper classes, and even how those upper classes can perpetrate a massive global decline for the sake of their entertainment. And not a lot of that is plain text interpretation of the series, so it's not force-fed down your throat. At its core, it's about a strong friendship between two people, as they fight to change the world in ever-growing ways. At first a fulfilling Natsume's dream of fighting in the powers, changing the game's storyline, and then bringing down the system as a whole. From the director of Bones' adaptation of Mob Psycho 100, and with the studio that adapted the saga of Tanya the Evil behind it, there was a lot of talent holding this one up, and it certainly stuck the landing. It's a stylistic and animation treat that weaves deep, topical themes relevant to today's viewers, stunning visuals, and has an emotional story that connects with the audience, so it's highly recommended. Oh damn. So after I made no effort in hiding the fact that I think ReZero is overrated, not bad, just not as good as most people make it out to be, with an incredibly slow start to the series that relies on shock value, and an incredibly cringy main character that takes almost 3 whole arcs to grow a backbone. But Season 2 changed my mind about the series as a whole. With a lot of the groundwork out of the way for the franchise in 24 episodes, Subaru's character, his relationships, and the world all converge into an arc that's actually interesting. Meeting the various witches, slowly piecing together the puzzle that is the tangled mess of situations, and actually allowing for some variety besides Subaru himself into the events, feels like the series is raising its own stakes. If you're invested in ReZero, you're already watching this. But if you're not sold on the whole isekai aspect, this is definitely one of the more story-driven ones out there that doesn't rely on the in another world gimmick as a crutch. So when I looked at the first season of No Gun's life back in fall 2019, I said it was good, though I do have to walk that statement back a bit, as it was mostly good in comparison to the rest of that abysmal anime season. But where Season 1 is just sort of a neat cyberpunk series that had some interesting concepts that didn't really go anywhere, Season 2 connects all of those loose threads and weaves them together excellently, where we learn more about the characters, the reason why the world is the way it is, and far more engaging action scenes. I don't know if it sells the series in itself, but for those who aren't entirely certain if they should continue, I wholeheartedly think Season 2 is where this series starts to shine. Now here's where my tastes are gonna get called into question. Maou Gakuin no Futekigousha was fucking fantastic. It takes the most enjoyable aspects of the overpowered protagonist concept and adds an air of confidence to it. Where a lot of series using that gimmick have done so to tell character-driven dramas about how excelling at something so much leaves you depressed due to the lack of challenge or makes you shallow if you rely on it, this series uses it for pure mindless fun. I won't deny why I like it. It's just the sheer hype of seeing the main dude shrug off literal gods with a flick of his wrist, or dominating those who cross him, but it's also deeper than that, as the series delves into the inherent distrust people have for the resurrected Demon King, since they don't believe him. He's just a false messiah in their eyes, so he has to right the wrongs of the world while preserving the peace he created 2,000 years ago. I won't pretend this one's deep or anything, but it's the best sort of trashy entertainment. Now, I don't just like shonen trash or obvious reviewer wankbait. I have a soft spot for romance too, and I'll admit, I was a bit unfair to Uzaki-chan wa Asobitai when I looked at it in my season preview. It's a pretty interesting one. Where most romance stories use drama to get people invested, this one uses comedy and some ecchi elements, doing a nice twist on the formula. And that's saying something. As someone who found the initial humor in the first few episodes cringy, and Uzaki herself annoying beyond belief. But her annoying personality is just a coping mechanism, and the main dude's aloofness is just who he is. Their chemistry is deeper than the initially presented she annoys him dynamic, as they both get under one another's skin, but genuinely care for each other. When looking at it as two awkward people slowly moving towards a romantic relationship, the series starts to stand out, and that's where I ended up on this. It also helps the supporting cast push that narrative too, and as we get to know the two leads more, we see it for ourselves. Not your standard romance story, but one to check out if you're into that sort of thing. With shows I liked out of the way, I can talk more about the ones that were middle of the road. These weren't necessarily bad, but I can't outright recommend them for one reason or another. These next few come with a conditional, because they had their own issues. I really liked Lapis Re Lights in concept. A magical girl idol anime in a fantasy world where they use their songs to cheer people up and fight monsters. Sounds amazing. It sort of doesn't deliver on that though, at least not for a while. Considering it took 8 episodes for the main cast to form an idol group, and the concept of idol groups in the show didn't really make an appearance until the end of episode 2, they sort of feel shoehorned in, you know? Which is a shame, since there was a decent amount of lore and the climax for the series was really good, as they used that as a core theme to save the day, while making a massive splash. For the setting itself, like I said, there's quite a bit of backstory and an interesting magic system that really does set this apart from any other in the genre. The colorful cast does sort of get grating, but that's pretty much what you expect when you sit down to watch idol anime. I feel like a season 2 for this show might expand more where it needs to, and with that bait left at the end of this season, I'm expecting there to be one. Check it out if you like idol anime. But I mostly just feel there should have been more idol, or maybe less. Kinda hard to say. For a series so full of potential, Dokyuu Hentai HxEros fell pretty flat. It had a lot of possibility to be somewhat subversive and maybe deeper by talking about the sexualization of Sentai characters, especially with an almost entirely female cast, but instead it just settled on being predictable. The generic enemy of love-sucking bug monsters with some vaguely real-life inspired designs that barely feature in the show due to how little focus there is on fighting means most of the runtime that should be devoted to the main plot of the series is diverted to pointless ecchi interactions, like walking in on the girls bathing, or them sneaking into the main dude's bed. You know, anything that lets you see the girls naked, but also is heavily censored. Stuff like that makes me wonder about the purpose of this series, but mostly I'm just disappointed. This one might give me some backlash. Kanojo Okarishimasu was cringe incarnate, and trust me, I'm speaking from experience here. I'm not much a fan of cringe comedy in the first place, since it's just embarrassing to watch. Like, specifically, this dude prostrates himself for women who barely realize he exists is just pathetic. But that was the main source of humor in this one. And when it wasn't trying to make the main dude look like a massive loser, jerking off to the thought of his ex with another guy, or fantasizing about the main girl who's one step removed from an actual prostitute, it instead decided to have a weird love polygon that makes the main dude look like the worst sort of scum and abusing the good nature of the people around him. That said, I definitely like the art style, and the girls in this series are fantastic characters I like as well. If only the glue holding this together wasn't so damn loathsome, I'd have a more positive opinion. If you like trash people hooking up with hotties and just generally being simps, check it out. This next one had some interesting stuff going on, but it suffered from some adaptational woes. Koito Producer is just sort of there for me, since it feels like an adapted visual novel plot, meaning there's too many character arcs going on for me to really care, and that sort of gets in the way of the superpowers, evil organization, and reporter subplots that are far more interesting to the actual series. The characters aren't super likable in the first place, and the main girl's only blip on her character radar is a goal about making her father's production company more successful. And by doing that, she's milking more successful people's careers. Way to send a positive message. It is nice to see MAPPA doing a good job with animation again though, as this series looks polished and has some nice direction to go with it. With the various romance threads in this one, it's not terrible, but it suffers from trying to do too much. Watch it only if you're really thirsty for some romance, or are a fan of the game, I guess. Speaking of MAPPA doing a good job with animation, the God of High School is... damn. This was another show I was pretty excited to see where it went. With the sudden surge of Korean webtoon adaptations in Japan between this and Tower of God, I thought this series would do more for me. It's essentially a bunch of super badass shonen fights with superpowers that are pure spectacle. But unfortunately, that seems to be where the series ends. Sure, there's some deeper stuff about gods and how this tournament is just a ploy for unlocking a key, but ultimately, those threads don't interest me enough to really care, because even that is still just another excuse for more fighting. Overall, it looks nice, has some great cinematography, really hype action, but lacks severely in the story department, which makes it great for sharing those action scenes on YouTube. Check it out if you like the shonen genre, and that's pretty much it. And here we go. We're down to the part of the video where I talk about shows I really didn't like, either because they were boring, were hard to watch, or wasted my time. And we've got a little bit of all of those coming up in this section. Monster Musume no Oishasan was, honestly, just boring. Looking at the storyline for this series, not much really happened for our main cast. Like, they didn't grow or anything, and the status quo barely changes. What makes this feel like a massive waste of potential though is the background for this series is decently interesting, where humans and monsters try to live in peace after a massive war that spanned 100 years. So the storyline doesn't really add up to much, meaning I'm just watching then for the girls and the animation. So how do those fare? With how crap the ecchi is without committing enough to it, it's just sort of watered down. Adding insult to injury on that is just how piss poor the animation itself is. And goddamn was it bad with shit CG, awkward framing, and more focus on trying to get the girls to look good for eye candy than make the movements look nice. Easily skipped. Peter Grill to Kenja no Jikan had a lot of the same problems, but somehow it's in a worse spot. Being a short runtime anime, it's suffering from a quick pace. That means most of the main story elements can't be explored in depth, leaving us with a rushed plotline. Luckily, it isn't super complicated, but the ecchi elements here are more along the lines of just censored porn. The girls spend most of their time just flat out naked, and using highlights to blow out their junk so it doesn't get a higher television rating is pretty dumb. Plus, the animation is just clunky, most of the time using some low frame rates and some gimmicky cutaways to cut corners. Yeah, go ahead and skip it. Ninja Collection was just disappointing. I really liked the initial pitch for a horror anime, but that just sort of fell to the wayside when I realized just how little attachment I had with the series. It's an interesting anime from an artistic standpoint, but the story itself didn't really grab me. I ended up dropping this one because it couldn't hold my attention, and that may have been because of the limited animation. A nice concept, not that great of an execution. And for my least favorite punching bag, Gibiate was a fucking catastrophe this season. Since I managed to no shit talk for 20 minutes about how bad this series is, I'll just try to be brief. Really shitty anime that suffers from a severe lack of budget using plastic CG models that don't blend with the scene, extreme abuse of close-ups to cover up the action, extremely limited movements when they decided to actually show the action, and to top it all off, a cheesy plotline that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. It feels like it stepped right out of the mid-90s, not in a good way. Just about everything in this anime was a complete shit show, and it fucking terrifies me that the producers want to turn this into a long-running project. Avoid this at all costs. So that's it. I'm not putting numbers on these shows, and will probably avoid doing so in the future because boiling down my opinion to something as trivial as a numerical value sort of undermines any points I've made. And with that, we'll bring this video to a close. Let me know what you thought down in the comments about any of the shows this season. If you like my content, you can support the channel with a like, subscribe, or share, or even supporting me on Patreon. With Fall Around the Corner, you can vote on what I watch next season by joining me there. I also have a Discord in the description, you can check that out too. I would also like to thank my Patreon supporter Volcarona for their continued support. And as always, thanks for watching.